The Detroit Red Wings haven't lost very many games, but the Jets walked into a tough arena and came away with a 4-1 victory. We'll dive into how much of it was earned and how much of it was perhaps a little bit fortunate on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, my name is Harrison Lee. I'm the host of this podcast. You can find me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. I'm an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger, so be sure to follow me for more Jets discussion and perhaps a few Jets memes. Thanks for making our podcast your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. But more than anything, we love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more right now as new customers can bet $5 and get up to $200 back in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to learn more and get started. Now, like I said, obviously the Jets just finished up a game against the Detroit Red Wings not too long ago, and this was a game in which the Jets won 4-1, but you would probably say the Jets were maybe a little bit fortunate to come away with the scoreline being the way that it was. Winnipeg actually didn't take too many penalties, which is nice, right? In previous games, the Jets have maybe been a little bit careless and undisciplined. In this one, Winnipeg was generally pretty tight and played well. You know, I think they defended in the right ways. I think they avoided getting themselves into too many dangerous situations with loose sticks and stuff. Which is good, right? Because the Red Wings actually came into this game with one of the top-end power plays in the whole league. And when you saw the way that they moved the puck and some of the chances that they created, you can understand why they're ranked like second so far, just a few games into the season. I know that, of course, it's a small sample size, and it can be hard to figure out how much of this is legitimate performance and how much is perhaps, a few extra bounces going your way. But based on the way that the Red Wings were passing around Winnipeg's PK Diamond, I'm going to lean towards it being pretty legit. Detroit, frankly, cut open the Jets on numerous occasions. If not for Hellebuyck and a few nice interceptions from the Jets' defenders, Winnipeg could have found itself in a very different game on some of these, power penalty kills and stuff. So obviously for Winnipeg, it's important to stay out of the box. But, I've mentioned before that the Jets do play well at even strength. Unfortunately, this wasn't one of those games. I wouldn't say the Jets were bad necessarily, but towards the back half of this game, you saw a very different Jets team that struggled to get zone exits, that failed to clear the puck numerous times, and that gave up way too many opportunities to a pretty talented Red Wings team. Make no mistake, Detroit perhaps doesn't have, maybe, a McDavid or anything, but they're pretty darn deep. Larkin is good. Veleno is looking pretty good. Theron was a very savvy addition. There's a lot on this team that's looking great, and they've got some young talent and guys like Raymond, right? Obviously, this team is still kind of putting the pieces together, and I think it will be some time before it all gels. But just for a few games through the season so far, they really have put the rest of the league on notice that they have some pretty serious scoring chops. They had an average of like 4.6 or 4.7 goals each game over the past few games. And for the Jets, that's been a little bit scary because Winnipeg is definitely on the leakier side. Thankfully, though, for all of the Jets' mistakes and misfortunes, when it mattered most and the ships were all kind of down, the Jets pulled it together somehow and ended up with some really fortunate goals. Now, I will say the first couple of goals the Jets scored were just nice. Ehlers, of course, finally getting off the schneid after having a bit of a tough start, gets a great pass from Perfetti and makes it 1-0. And, from there, it just sort of felt like Winnipeg kind of fell into place. They scored again not too long after that, and then in the subsequent periods, they got some depth scoring from guys like Mason Appleton. So all in all, offensively, the Jets did okay. You'll probably take note that the number one star of the evening was Connor Hellebuyck, and it was very easy to see why. For one thing, there were some odd bounces around the boards, which put the puck in some pretty dangerous areas when the Jets' defense occasionally got caught by a fun surprise bounce. But on the other hand, I would also say Detroit definitely earned its opportunities. They got down low really quickly and put Hellebuyck under a lot of stress. Were it not for Hellebuyck being at his usual best self, this could have been a very different scoreline. So Winnipeg definitely owes one to Helly this evening. A really big game from him, and perhaps, just perhaps, we're seeing the version of him that we can expect more of this season. When he's playing at the top of his game, he is, one of the truly elite netminders in the NHL. There's zero question for me that he has been an absolute anchor and a rock for the squad, which is important, right? Because if you're going to have a game where you're not the best of even strength, and maybe even on the power play you struggle as well, then you've got to have somebody who can help steal a few points, and that's kind of where Hellebuyck came in. Now, I'm not going to say that the Jets were dominated because I don't know that that's necessarily the case, but I will say towards the second half of the game, it was all Detroit at long stretches, right? There were moments where Winnipeg got hemmed in very deeply, and the Red Wings just kept buzzing and buzzing. If not for Hellebuyck and also Detroit's, penchant for kind of shooting from distance, Winnipeg could have found itself in a tough spot. But like I said, Hellebuyck was the big equalizer. He made a huge difference, very much earned his first star of the evening, and only conceded one goal, which, considering this Red Wings team has kind of been annihilating opponents so far, you got to like that. Very big performance from Helly. Glad to see him back to where we sort of expected him at the start of the year. Takes him a couple of games at times to get into the rhythm and to feel like he's got the flow again, but I don't know that it's going to take as long this year. If the last 3 or so games are any indication, Hellebuyck's back already. That time off, I'm sure he's gotten some lovely family time, but he looks like he's focused and dialed in now. So at this point, it's just a matter of watching whether the rest of the Jets team can keep up and avoid falling flat on its face, like we've seen in some previous seasons. But you know what? It's nice when you've got a team like the Jets are right now, where there's a lot more distribution in the scoring. There's depth lines that you can really rely on. And of course, you still have some pretty good and pretty potent top six scoring. Now, one of those top six scorers has had a strange start to the year. He's already got 5 or so goals, and you might think to yourself, well, that's pretty darn special. He's got to be having a great year. And you'd be surprised at how the surface level stats can mask some very big problems with a player like Kyle Connor. We'll dive into why his season is a little bit more chaotic than you might imagine. But before we go any further, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 back in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose, and who doesn't want a second chance? We know that the NFL season this year has been a little bit chaotic, so even if you lose, just betting $5 gets you $200 in bonus bets to try your luck again, which, hey, for some of you Vikes fans, maybe you definitely want to make use of that. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time than now to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use and features tons of categories from players or player props, over-unders, spreads, and so much more. All at your fingertips, all convenient, and all with the trusted name in sportsbooks. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season in style. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Hello, friends, and welcome back to these middle thoughts, I would say, of tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making us, of course, your first listen of the day every day. I just wanted to kind of circle back to something I mentioned just before the break. It's not often where you have somebody who's amazingly gifted at scoring, but perhaps gives a little bit too much back to the opponents, to a point where it almost overwhelms all the stuff that they do well. But that's kind of the problem that you have with Kyle Connor. KFC is one of the most unusual players in the league in that when he's shooting the puck, things are usually pretty good. But when he's not shooting the puck, it's a bit of a tire fire. We haven't really seen many players that I would say have Connor's particularly polarizing profile. Kessel, I would say, is like the closest example. Maybe Drew Stafford, like a really amazing Drew Stafford, is kind of, similar to what the Jets have with Kyle Connor. And I don't mean that in the sense that he's a very bad player, but the problem with KFC is that when he's not the one directly shooting the puck and trying to score, things can be really grim for his participation in stuff like build-up, transition, offensive creation through defenders. He is kind of an odd one because he has some of the most explosive and extraordinary tools of any skater on this team. And I truly mean it. When it comes to players with like an amazing natural release and effortless skating, an incredible shot, very soft hands, Kyle Connor's kind of at the top of almost every one of these lists. The problem is that getting him to make use of those tools is a bit of a challenge. It's been hard for him to get into the most dangerous areas on a consistent basis, and you'll notice when he tries to carry the puck himself, it can be a bit of a mixed bag. Take, for example, his attempt this evening to get through the neutral zone and make an offensive zone entry. He, for some reason, ended up skating into like 3 Red Wings, immediately turned it over, and it got countered on and almost scored upon. So, off of a poor decision from KFC, you suddenly find yourself on the back foot, and no one else was really back to defend other than, like, I think it was maybe DeMello or somebody else. The Jets ended up getting really fortunate. I think if this is the same counter, and they did give up more than a few, so needless to say, whether it was that specific counter or not, all I can tell you is that KFC is giving up too much at the other end of the ice to really be worth it at times. You'll notice that when he's defending in front of Hellebuyck, he's often, not marking super tightly, and he doesn't tend to win as many physical battles. He'll definitely get himself in the mix, but you notice he's not the one who's going to be outworking an opponent on a consistent basis. He can do it once in a while, but not enough to where you'd feel comfortable running him out as much as he does get run out. And the problem with KFC is that his defensive work is so bad, and his lack of what you might call offensive buildup is also so bad that it kind of takes away from his line. He and Scheifele together have not posted great results. That's just the honest to goodness truth. KFC is basically a non-factor defensively, so when it comes to, all the rest of his stuff, you have to hope that he basically chips in at least like 2 points to 2 goals a game. So that's not really sustainable is all I can say. And looking at how the Jets have tried to get him and Scheifele, working together well, they had Velarde with him, and that trio worked, but without Velarde, it's been a much bigger question. They tried Appleton there. That didn't go so well. They tried Iafallo there, and it's been okay, not great. But the long and short of it is, at some point, it'd be nice if the Jets split Ehlers and Connor, or Scheifele and Connor. I love that they are fun scorers, and, I think one of them said they loved working with the other, and I'm sure they've got a strong connection and chemistry, but defensively, they're a train wreck together, and it takes away from so many of the good offensive things that they do further up the ice that it is, it sucks. It sucks to say that. It sucks to feel like I'm, really crapping on a player here, but I'm just being honest about how, Connor's performance has been this year. It's kind of a mixed bag, and he's not the only one if we're being honest. Josh Morrissey, I feel like, this year has struggled more defensively than I expected him to. Defending is not really his game anyways. He's the kind of guy who's got the excellent offense, great passing, and strong skating to make his value elsewhere on the ice instead of in the DZ. And I don't mind that. That's great. The problem with Morrissey so far this year is that a lot of his offense has kind of come off of really risky plays that were perhaps a little too risky. And honestly, he was cheating for offense on certain occasions where I feel like that might not be the best choice. And look, I love Morrissey. I think he's really coming to his own as a number one for this Jets squad. But I feel like this year there's a bit of a step back compared to how he was creating offense last year. And maybe to the naked eye, it's not as visible. I think some of you who have kind of compared him and contrasted him from last season probably understand what I'm talking about. There's definitely some cheat in his game this year. He is making more aggressive reads, and sometimes they're not the right ones. I feel like he maybe gambles a bit more than he needs to, and he's also misplayed more passes than he did last year. So with Morrissey, at least on the score sheet, it's not a problem. But under the surface, probably some stuff the Jets want to take a look at. But we all know that with KFC, there's zero question that, the stuff is not exactly hidden when it comes to what he's deficient at. Everyone knows, scoring is his game, and that's kind of it. So if Winnipeg wants to bring Kyle Connor back, they've got to figure out a way to really insulate him. I think that's the only way I can describe it, because he really can't be playing top line minutes. It's just not working out. And if he is going to play top line minutes, then you better sure as heck find someone who can do a lot of the defensive details and keep the puck away from Hellebuyck, because unfortunately, that's not going to be how Connor plays. So let me know what you think of KFC. Are you a big fan of his? Do you kind of share some of the same frustrations? Let me know in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_underscore Winnipeg Jets on Twitter. In just a little bit, I want to talk about some old friends who are going to be returning to town over the weekend and why it could be a very special and memorable game for the Jets against the New York Rangers. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at Jace Medical. When you're out in the field, a lot of you have perhaps gone hiking. Maybe you like to do exploring. Some of you may even love to travel abroad. And you know what? It can be a tough time when you're running into a personal emergency. Maybe you cut yourself on a piece of metal, or you find yourself with a bit of a bad case of food poisoning. We all know that all of this stuff can happen at any point, and Jace Medical wants to help empower you to protect yourself with a personalized emergency medical kit featuring 5 essential antibiotics that treat most of the common and deadly bacterial infections. Jace Medical offers the Jace case that's super flexible, very customizable, and they want to expand their medication offerings for those who are perhaps looking for different items. Maybe you need to customize your case to meet your personal travel needs. No matter what, though, Jace Case is here to help, and they also offer continuing consultation and support after you make your first purchase. So if you're ready to get started, go to jacemedical.com and enter code LOCKEDON at checkout for a $20 discount on your order. That's promo code LOCKEDON at jasemedical.com. I also wanted to shout out our friends and partners at Sleeper. Those of you who have ever played daily fantasy hockey know that it can be a bit of a brutal season, right? A new NHL season can also bring all sorts of opportunities and possibilities, though, and that's what makes it really exciting. Maybe Shively's going to score 50 goals this year. Maybe the Jets even hoist the Stanley Cup. And you could win big and celebrate it all by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy sports app of the Locked On NHL Network. They cover all of the biggest daily fantasy sports, but especially daily fantasy hockey. Because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. Maybe this is a great chance to track how young players like Perfetti and Ehlers and some of the other stars do for the Jets. Perhaps you also want to follow stars from other teams, including Ovechkin, McKinnon, McDavid, all the big names. You can help and have fun with daily fantasy hockey, betting with some of their most important stats categories. And if you want to win 100 times your bet with Sleeper, you want to correctly predict the outcome of 8 different player stats. You just heard me right. You have to pick 8 player stats, and you can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big right now. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you get up to a $100 match on your very first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Hello, friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts in tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us as we talk about an upcoming game this week that I think is going to be, a slightly bittersweet one for a lot of Jets fans. Some of you perhaps were more happy that some of our our ex comrades have departed and are now finding greener pastures elsewhere. This weekend, the Jets are welcoming the New York Rangers, and it promises to be a fun game, an emotional one, and we've already seen early teasers from, Jets staff that they're doing a pretty special welcome for Blake Wheeler. Wheeler has been, playing pretty well for the Rangers, although you'll look at the score tracker for him, and I don't think he actually has any points so far. But his line has generally controlled play, from what I've heard. They're used very sparingly. They're not exactly being asked to do a lot. So I think in that way, a third line role with reduced minutes for Wheeler makes a lot of sense for where he's at this stage of his career. And you look at the contract that he signed, and it kind of tracks that way. A guy being paid almost league minimum probably isn't expecting to be a top 6 contributor. So Wheeler should get a hero's welcome when he comes back to Winnipeg. And I know that there have been some stories and things about how his tenure as Jets captain went. But I'll say this, at the end of the day, the dude paid his dues. He was a lifelong Jet for what felt like forever. And despite, the complications and things of his legacy as Jets captain and some of his interactions with players on the team, at the end of the day, he will always have a spot in my heart for the player and leader that he was. He was really amazing. And those prime years where he just completely overwhelmed opponents is what I will choose to remember the most fondly. He was a monster, and it's a shame that age caught up to him, because if he could still play the way he did back then, he would not be on the Rangers. He'd be a critical, core piece of this team, and perhaps, really taking it to Winnipeg's opponents. But unfortunately, that time is kind of come and passed, and instead, Wheeler is, again, a really solid third liner who might be able to swing up and down the lineup in emergency situations, but you kind of know what you're getting with him. The Jets are also welcoming back former Jet Jacob Trouba, which Trouba, I don't know that the attachment has been as strong over the years. Obviously, Winnipeg fans, they liked Trouba in a lot of ways, but when he wanted to leave a few years ago, most people were ready to hit the eject button. But with Trouba, there were some legit reasons why he wanted to move. Obviously, family and his spouse, came first. So that you really can't fault. And he left relatively gracefully, right? I think it wasn't like a Dubois situation where, Dubois kind of threw the Jets under the bus. Trouba left relatively cleanly. So, I really don't hold any ill will towards him. It'll be nice to see him back. I will say it is really funny that he's now Wheeler's captain because it used to be the inverse when Trouba was still here. So, yeah, interesting dynamics. We'll see how that plays out. But it should be a nice game all the same, a fun evening, and it would be nice to give Wheeler the proper Jets send-off. I still want him to come back for like one of those one-day contracts and sign it, take the ice with the Jets one final time, and then call it a career on what has been really one of the longest tenured and most successful Jets 2.0 players that we've ever seen. So hopefully Sunday or Saturday, though, we still get the win and, come away with good vibes all around. But let me know if you're going to be excited to see Wheeler and Trouba back in the rink. Drop your comments and feelings below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets on Twitter. For tonight's show, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll be back here tomorrow with more Jets coverage, so don't go anywhere. Have a great night, and go Jets, go.